Hey, this is Chris Crawford with Chris Crawford Knives, and what I want to do here is I want to unwarp some handle material, some knife scales, some bone knife scales that I made for a scale release auto. Now the reason that I say unwarp is because I don't want to simply sand them flat. I don't want to put them back on my disc sander or sanding them on my flat surface and get the bottom flat. I want to take the bow out of them, and the reason for this is because the handle material, the scales are already completed. Now, I just recently released a video, a 2024 update to my Scale Release Autos video, and this is the knife that I put together. After I got the knife together and after I got done filming the video, I got to looking at it and I noticed that the scales weren't laying flat against the liners. And then, so I went through the process of removing the scales. If you've seen that video, this makes sense why I use the spot glue, because I could get a little razor in there and I could pop it off and disassemble the knife. Well, anyway, I've done that, I've cleaned up the glue, and now I'm left with two scales with a very slight bow in them. And I think it's just from the fact that I ground these scales, I don't know, I kind of shaped them a good while back, and they've been sitting around my shop. I think that's part of the reason they warp. I think part of the reason too is because of the heat on the top and not really the heat on the bottom may have caused them to warp. But nonetheless, I've got this warp in the scales. Now normally, if I were just doing a slip joint and I had this little bit of slight warp in there, well, I would just, by the time I glued them and pinned them down to my liners and put everything together, they would be enough to pull the warp out because it's really minor. But on these scale release autos, the problem is, I put the whole knife together, and then the very last thing that goes on are the scales on both sides of the knife, and they're just on by a couple of screws and a little bit of glue. It's kind of spot glued, because I don't want to glue the whole surface in case I do have to take the scales off to get into the knife to correct an issue or fix something like that. And so it's important that the scales lay flat, and so that when they go on the liners, they sit there flat. And so that's what we're going to do. Now I don't know if this is going to work. I've been playing around and doing some experimenting with a piece of handle material that I had cut out once before for another knife and didn't use for some reason. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to try to unwarp this little piece of handle material. If that works, then we're going to try the same technique on these scales that are finished out to go onto this knife. Now we're going to go over to the whiteboard and I'm going to show you kind of what the problem is and tell you the strategy that we're going to use to try to unwarp these scales. I'm going to draw up here what I think's going on and what I think that we can do to fix it. Now, please note that I'm not necessarily taking a scientific approach. This is based totally on observation. Hopefully my observations line up with science, but if not, I don't know, somebody can correct me. But here's what I think is going on. So here's our scale. And you have to excuse my drawing, I'm a terrible artist. So there's our scale. Now what's happened is, this is going to be totally exaggerated, but just for the camera. What has happened is the scale has warped kind of like this. And like I say, it's totally exaggerated. I think what happens is like, okay, so here's the scale, here's the bottom. And as I'm grinding the top and kind of profiling it and contouring, I'm putting a lot of heat right here. And I think what that heat does is I think the heat draws up the scale and it contracts in this area, and then it causes it to warp. Now, I don't think it's just bone. I ran into this when I was working on, actually it was the first time I heat treated some stainless in the oven, and I took it out of the package and I laid it on an aluminum block. So here's our aluminum block. And I took that spring or blade or whatever out, and I just laid it flat on there like that. Well, when it was all said and done, that blade, it was like a banana. I mean, it was like this right here. It wasn't really that bad. But it was so bad that if I went to surface grind the warp out of it, I would have gone all the way down to the corner before I got the warp out of it. So I think that's what's going on. As heat gets applied here, it causes it to contract and then causes it to bow like that. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to try to apply those same techniques but in the opposite direction. So I'm going to have an aluminum plate. Let me grab another marker here. Okay, so here's our aluminum plate. Now I've got an aluminum plate right now sitting in the sink, in a sink full of water. And so when I bring it out, it's probably going to be about, I'm guessing it's going to be about 63 or 64, 63 to 65 degrees. just because that's what it is. The shop runs about 67, and that tap water is going to be a little bit colder. So I think that's about what that plate's going to be. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a scale, and this is a test scale, all right? And this test scale has already got some warp in it. So let me redraw this with some warp. Of course, exaggerated warp, like this. And what we're going to do is we're going to, so this is the top. What we're going to do is we're going to apply heat at the warp, okay? And then what we're going to do is we're going to flip it upside down and we're going to lay it on the cold piece of aluminum, like this. And what that should do is that should cause this part, the hot part right here, to contract and pull the warp out. So as that top contracts, this should go up like this, and that should go up like that, hopefully. So that's the plan, and we'll see if that'll work. This is that scale release auto that I put together in the 2024 update video, and so you can see here I've totally disassembled it and recleaned the parts. And these are the two scales that have a slight warp. So the reason that I don't want to just put these scales on the disc sander and sand them down is a couple of reasons. One, the front ends of the scales already match the bolster, so they're already ground smooth with the bolster. The bolster has already been cleaned up and, you know, hand rubbed. I might have to do a little touch up after the knife gets together, but I've already done that, and the front end matches the bolster, so I really don't want to take any depth out of it. But also, these handles have cutouts in there, or little, I guess, countersink areas or whatever for the screws. So I don't want to take any more off of this because I don't want to shallow those holes, and so that the screws bottom out against the handle. So the only other option then, besides totally remaking it, which I may end up having to do, but I thought, well, I'm going to try this first. The only other option is to try to take the warp out of the scale. Now this right here is this is the one that we're testing on. So this was one, I don't know what happened here. You can see how big that hole is. It probably blew out. I probably did it too far. You can see a little bit of a cutout here. So this was originally, I think, going to be, it must have been a scale release auto scale, and it just went south. So this is the one that we're going to use to test. Now, one of the things that I use to test to see if liners are flat or if handle material's flat and that kind of stuff is I use a mirror. So this is just like a little cheap mirror. I think it was one, I think I got it from Harbor Freight, actually, like one of these that you're supposed to use like in your car. And I took it out of the frame, you know, to look at your kids in the back seat or something. And I just JB welded me a can tab on there so I can, you know, hang it up on the wall on a little nail, but I've got it there. And you can see it's pretty scratched up. But what I like about this is the thing about a mirror is perfectly flat. And also a mirror, I mean, this is going to sound like a dumb statement, but a mirror reflects what's on there. So what does that mean? I can put a liner on here like this, and I can push down on one side. See if I can get in here close. I don't know how well this is going to focus, but I can get in here like this, and I can look down that edge just like this, and any gap, the mirror is going to double it because it's reflecting that gap. Now you can tell with this liner that I don't really have any, you know, this liner is really flat. Like I can push down on this back end, and when I look down here, I can see that it's flat against there. It's not moving any. And come back down this way and kind of do the same thing. It's not moving any. So this liner is good and flat. And so this is, you know, I use a mirror for this. And also another thing about this, because the glass is so flat, you can try to spin whatever it is, and if it's bowed, it's going to spin. Like for instance, let's take this scale. So I can put this scale on here, spins like a top. Okay? So this is how that we know it's bowed. Now if I turn it over this way, I mean it's going to move a little bit, but it's just the momentum, but it's not spinning. It's coming in out of focus there. But if I go this side, you can see that it spins. Now, for these handles, we'll try those. So see, they're spinning. That one is. This one not as much. So this one spins a little bit, but there's more friction on it. So this one here is bowed a little bit more. Now, going back to this test piece, so let's look at it. Let's look at it with a mirror. So if I hold down, come on, get in focus there. If I hold down this back side, you can see the gap in the front. Look at this back corner back here. You can see how much that is. Now that back corner may just be ground. Like one thing I did actually on this was I put some grids on here, and you can see, and then I kind of hand sanded to see. I think that corner is just you know, it's a little too much ground off that corner anyway. So it's not truly flat. But in addition to it not being flat, it's not flat. Yeah, it's got a bow to it. So you can see there. Oh, there's a good view right there. So you can see that bow up under there. Okay, that's what we want to get out. I've got our aluminum block out of the water and dried off, and it's sitting off to the side over here. I didn't want it near our heat source because I don't want to inadvertently be throwing heat on it. I want to keep it as cool as we can until we're ready for it. But we're going to be using these parallel pliers for holding our handle material. And I love these things. You can see as they open and close that the jaws stay parallel to each other. Unlike regular pliers where they act more like scissors, these things are great, especially for holding things like handle material. So this is our piece that we're going to be testing. All right, and remember it kind of bows this way. So this is the low spot, and these ends are the high spot. So I'm just going to grab it down here on the end, like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to apply heat. Okay, so we want to apply heat down here because when we set it down on the aluminum block upside down, we want it to start warping this way, right? And not really warping, but really straighten itself out. And if we overdo it, then we can come back and do this the other direction. But that's what we're going to try to do is we're going to apply the heat right here. And I'm going to heat, it's not going to take long because I've got my heat gun turned all the way up to high. And I'm going to heat it here until I can feel it, you know, really hot on this back side. And then we're going to set it down. I'll put the aluminum block down here, and we're going to set it down on there and just wait for it to cool to room temperature. And then we'll see what we end up with. All right, well, let's heat this thing up. And it doesn't take a whole lot of time for this to heat up. Kind of just heating it right in the middle because that's where the warp is. I can check it. That's getting pretty warm. I can't really keep my finger on it for long. All right, we'll turn that off. Grab our block, and we're going to put it down just like this. And we're going to let it sit there until it gets to room temperature. And then we'll put it on the mirror and we'll see what we're left with. It's gotten to room temperature, so let's see how it does on the old spin test on the mirror. Okay, it's still spinning, but it's not spinning as much. There's more drag in it. Let me check it. I think there's still some room for it to, to pull the bow out a little bit more, but this is definitely better than it was. So what I'm going to do off camera is I'm just going to go through this same process again. I'm going to reclamp it down here like this. I'm going to reheat it from this side, and then I'm going to put it back like this on the block. And I'm just going to keep doing that until I get the warp out. So we'll pick back up, hopefully, after I get the warp out. All right, we're back, and this is cooled off. And I was doing some testing off camera to see how flat it was. And I want to show you one thing that I did differently. So this time, when I applied the heat, instead of applying the heat just like this to the center, I applied the heat side to side. So I went, instead of going like up and down like this, I actually applied it this way across the face or the bottom face of the whole scale. And then I think that helped it because when I laid it down, you had the heat of the whole thing that, well actually I did it this way to cause it to start unwarping. Now, once it sat there for a few minutes, I got my mirror out and I tested it and I put it on there, and notice that it doesn't spin. It doesn't spin freely like it did before. But once it was unwarped, it was still a little bit warm. So what I didn't want to do is I didn't want to go back to the aluminum block. So I basically just held it in my hand like this and just fanned it in the open air, trying to cool it off until I got it to room temperature without, being back on here and causing any more warp. So let's take a look at it on the mirror. And you can see there, see how flat that is? I mean, like, this actually worked, which it shouldn't surprise me, but it does surprise me a little bit. Now, it doesn't go on this handle, but yeah, let's put it on there and look. You see how flat that is and how nice it sits on the liner now. And I'm not even like pressing down. I mean, I'm just holding it on there. Well, I think overall we can say that our test is successful. What I planned to do on this video was to straighten or unwarp the test piece, and then if that worked, I was going to unwarp my other two pieces, the actual pieces that go back on the knife, and then show those. But I did notice that the battery on my microphone is about to go out, and I think the audio may have already glitched out once, and so if there was a place where it glitched out, I apologize for that. So I am going to do the other scales, but I'm not going to do it on film. I think this does show that the idea of heating it this way and putting it on the aluminum block is going to work for dewarping scales. So anyway, I will move forward with the other ones, but hopefully this information will help you as well if you end up with some warped scales. Thanks.